Welcome YPOHarareCultivationFFmessage members and families to the Cultivation Cultures event at the Plot Nursery. I would love to be with you planting indigenous trees right now, but I have to be in my school in Bavaria in Germany. But our biggest hero is Wangari Maathai, the Peace Nobel Prize laureate from Kenya. Because of her, children in Kenya and in many other countries know that if they don't at least plant 8 trees in their lives, then they breathe the air of others. We have to use this example, this great project, and spread it globally. We children and youth globally see global crisis we have to solve together. And to do that, we need the help of entrepreneurs. We see 2 main crises globally: the poverty crisis and the climate crisis. The poverty crisis with 30,000 people, mainly children, dying of starvation every single day. 1 billion people living with less than $1 a day, and 1/2 of the world's population living with less than $2 a day. And at the same time, we have the climate crisis. Every day we take as much carbon in form of coal, gas and oil out of the ground as it took 1 million days for the sun to store it there. We see these two main crises, but at the same time, most adults, mainly the people from the US, see 9/11 as the darkest day in history. At that terrible terrorist act, 3,000 people died, and we are still fighting wars because of it. But for these 30,000 people starving each day, who is fighting for them? And for us children, 12/11 is the darkest day in history. At the climate conference 15 months ago. Because at that climate conference, there was a very simple goal. A follow-up protocol for the Kyoto Protocol, which ended last year. But instead of making a contract which starts at the beginning of this year, the governments decided there should only be a contract starting in 2020. That means that in 2013, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19, all countries can exhaust unlimited amounts of CO2. And that also means that the 2 degrees goal is impossible to reach. But this 2 degrees goal, which adults have promised us since years, since decades, isn't just a political goal, but it's a very important goal coming from the climate scientists. Because if the temperature rises by more than 2 degrees, then the Greenland ice will melt, and the sea level will rise by 7 meters, and so on. At our academies, we learn a very simple goal. If we don't want the temperature to rise by more than 2 degrees, we're only allowed to exhaust 2 tons of CO2 per person per year. And if we only want the temperature to rise by 1.5 degrees, we're only allowed to exhaust 1.5 tons of CO2 per person per year. But globally right now, we have an average of 6 tons per person per year. And a European is at 10 tons, an American at 20, and an average person in Africa is at around 1/2 ton, around 1 ton in that area. And if we continue that way until 2020, until we have that contract, we might have set the stage for 5 or 6 degrees plus. But no one knows what that means, only that when it was once 5 degrees colder than today, there were 2 kilometers of ice over us here. And at that climate conference 15 months ago, the Canadians made it even worse. During the conference, the Canadian Environment Minister gave a speech. And during that speech, 6 of us youth from Canada stood up and turned around. And on the back of their t-shirts it said, "Turn your back to Canada." They were thrown out of the hall, out of the conference. And a few days later, the Canadian Environment Minister returns home and announces that Canada will step out of the Kyoto Protocol. Just a few months before it ended, Canada just steps out, because in that contract they signed that they would reduce the emissions by 6%. But instead of doing that, they went up by 25%. And because of that, they should have paid a fine. They should have paid 14 million US dollars. But to save that money, they decided to step out of the Kyoto Protocol. Does that mean our future isn't even worth 14 billion US dollars? And in the last years, we children and youth often ask ourselves, why is there so little action? Why is so little happening? Is it because of the perception of future? For most adults, future seems to mean 20, 30 or even 40 years. But for many of us children, 2100 might still be in our lifetime. And therefore, for most adults, it's an academic question if the sea level will rise by 1, 2 or 3 centimeters or 7 meters until 2100. But for many of us children and youth, it might be a question of survival. And it also seems that many of the adults are trying to hide behind the climate skeptics, the ones that say there is no climate crisis. But for all those, we have an answer. If we follow the climate scientists now, the ones that say there is a crisis, and we act, and in 20 years we find out that they were wrong, then we didn't do any mistake. But if we follow the climate skeptics, the ones that say there is no crisis, and we don't do anything, and in 20 years we find out that they were wrong, then it will be too late to save our future. And when we ask ourselves why there's so little action, we often stumble upon the example of the monkeys. If you let a monkey choose if he wants 1 banana now or 6 bananas later, the monkey will always choose the 1 banana now. And it seems that many adults think a little like these monkeys. And maybe the reason why there's so little action is because in a few years when we are in power and we will have to live with all the problems, we won't be able to take the adults into account for the problems they didn't solve, because they will be dead by then. And if this wasn't the case, many adults would probably act very differently. And today we have companies using the word sustainability in their speeches, in their reports, just to sell even more products. While at the same time, for us, it's the method of survival. Sustainability is our method for survival. And the word sustainability originally comes from the foresters. This year we have the anniversary, 300 years of the word sustainability. Because at that time the foresters understood that they are planting the trees their whole lives, although they themselves won't have an advantage from it. But the next generations have the advantage of these trees. But today, companies are proud of earning money without doing anything, without being sustainable. That's like a forester being happy for cutting down the trees without planting any new trees. And the best definition of sustainability we ever heard is from the indigenous people from North America. Once we were told by them that in their villages, every time they make a decision, they first think if even the 7th generation after them would still support this decision, and only in that cases they agree on doing something. And today, companies, they shouldn't make up a sector, a part of their company about sustainability. But sustainability has to be the center, has to be the goal of every company. And although it might not be the case today, in a few years soon, the companies being sustainable will have the competitive advantage due to it. So we have to work together. We have to work together globally for our future, for sustainability. And the best way to do that, to work together, is the internet, which is a powerful tool which we as our generation have, which all the generations before us did not have. And this is perfectly illustrated by the example of Severin Suzuki. 20 years ago, at the first sustainability conference, she gave a speech. She was 12 at that time. But everything she said at that time, 20 years ago, could have been showed again last year at the sustainability conference. Because in those 20 years, nearly nothing happened. But the good part of the story is that in these 20 years, her video got 20 million views on YouTube. But today, we can get 20 million views in 2 days with similar videos, similar messages, and we have to use that for our future. And in the last years, we children and youth often asked ourselves, what would we do if we were the heads of governments of the world? And by doing that, we created a 3-point plan. The first point, of course, is planting trees. Our goal is to plant 1 trillion trees. That's the number of trees that fit on this planet without having problems with civilizations, having problems with growing food, and so on. And if we plant these trees, they will absorb 1/3 of the global human-made CO2 emissions. And it also means that every person in the world has to plant 150 trees. So we have to take Wangari Maathai's idea, her project, and take it even further and extend it from 8 trees per person to 150 trees per person. And if we manage that, if we work together, we can make a huge step into saving our future by working together globally through that goal. But of course, with planting trees alone, we cannot solve these problems. And this is when the second point of the plan of the 3-point plan comes in. We have to leave the fossil fuels in the ground, coal, gas, and oil. And that by the latest in 2050. And the great thing about this point is that all the technology we need for zero emissions already exists today. We don't need to find out more, we have the technology already. And the third point is that until that time, until 2050, there's only a limited amount of CO2 we can still exhaust. And that's 1.5 tons per person per year. And if someone wants to exhaust more, then they pay to the ones that exhaust less. So hopefully we can work together and save our future and get active. So let's take Wangari Maathai's idea and bring it further and work together for that. Thank you.